I found out my parents sold my entire inheritance without telling me the morning after my 18th birthday, and they sat there smiling like they had just done me a favor. My mom actually slid a cup of coffee toward me like it was a normal day, while my dad said, "It's already done, Emily," like that was supposed to calm me down. My younger sister was leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me like she was waiting for me to cry. I remember my hands shaking so badly, I had to grip the edge of the table just to stay standing. Because in that moment I realized something much worse than losing money. I realized my own family had planned this behind my back. And the craziest part? They genuinely believed I had no way to stop them. Before I keep going, if this story hits you in any way, only if this story truly resonates with you, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always read them, and it reminds me I'm not as alone as I felt that day. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 now. And this is the story of the night that completely changed how I see my family forever. It didn't start with screaming or drama. It started small, quiet, the kind of quiet that feels normal until you look back and realize it wasn't. Growing up, my grandparents were everything to me. They were the kind of people who remembered every birthday, every small achievement, every little thing that made me feel seen. My parents, they were different. Not abusive, not anything obvious, just distant, always busy, always practical, always talking about money, like it was the only thing that mattered. When my grandparents passed, they left me something huge. I didn't even understand how huge at first. We're talking multiple properties, investments, savings. Enough that my parents suddenly started paying a lot more attention to me than they ever had before. At first it felt nice. My mom would ask me about my plans. My dad would suddenly give advice about being responsible. Even Sophie, my younger sister, who usually ignored me, started acting interested. But there was something off, little things. My dad asking specific questions about documents. My mom casually bringing up how families share everything. Sophie joking about how she'd spend it better. I laughed it off. I told myself I was overthinking. But then came my 18th birthday. The dinner was too perfect. My mom cooked my favorite meal, which she hadn't done in years. My dad gave a speech about how proud he was of me, which honestly felt strange coming from him. And Sophie kept watching me, like she knew something I didn't. That night, everyone hugged me, smiled, told me how much they loved me, and I remember going to bed thinking, maybe things were finally getting better. But what I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that a few hours before that dinner, I had already made a decision that would change everything. Because deep down, even back then, I think part of me knew I couldn't trust them. And the next morning would prove just how right I was. But not in the way any of us expected. Looking back, I think the signs were always there, just small enough that I kept brushing them off. Growing up, my house was quiet in a way that did not feel peaceful. It felt controlled. My dad, Robert, was the kind of man who spoke in short sentences and expected everyone to listen the first time. My mom, Linda, always backed him up, even when it did not make sense. And then there was Sophie. She was 3 years younger than me, but somehow she was always the center of everything. I remember one Christmas when I was about 10, my grandparents sent me this small, hand-painted music box. It was not expensive, but it was beautiful. I loved it. Sophie opened a brand new tablet that my parents bought her. And when she saw my music box, she said, "That is boring. Can I have it?" I laughed, thinking she was joking. She was not. She started pouting, and within minutes my mom turned to me and said, "Emily, just let her have it. You are older." I remember holding that music box in my hands, not even sure why it mattered so much, and then slowly handing it over while Sophie smiled like she had won something. That became a pattern. Birthdays, holidays, even small things like choosing where to eat dinner. If Sophie wanted it, she got it. If I said no, I was selfish. If I pushed back, I was difficult. My dad would say things like, "You need to think about the family, not just yourself." I heard that sentence so many times growing up that it almost stopped meaning anything, except it always ended the same way, with me giving something up. My grandparents noticed it too. They never said it directly, but they would pull me aside sometimes. My grandma would hand me $5 and whisper, "This is just for you. Do not tell anyone." My grandpa once told me, "You need to learn to stand your ground, kiddo." At the time, I did not really understand what he meant. I just smiled and nodded. When I turned 16, things started to shift a little more. That was when my grandparents began talking about their will more openly. Not in a dramatic way, just small comments here and there. My grandma once said during dinner, "We want to make sure everything goes to someone who will take care of it." My mom immediately jumped in and said, "Of course it will stay in the family." There was this moment, just a second, where my grandpa looked at me instead of her. It was subtle, but I felt it. After that, my parents started asking more questions. Not directly at first, just casual things. "Do you know what your grandparents are planning?" Or, "Have they talked to you about anything important?" I always said no, because at that point, I genuinely did not know the details. But the questions kept coming. And then they started changing tone. My dad would say, "Whatever they leave behind, we will manage it. You are too young to deal with that kind of responsibility." My mom would add, "It is better if everything stays under one roof." Sophie would laugh and say, "I call dibs on the lake house." They all laughed. I laughed too. But it did not feel like a joke. It felt like something already decided. Something I had not agreed to. The first time I really felt uncomfortable was about a month before my 18th birthday. I came home from school early one day, and I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. They did not know I was there. My mom said, "We need to handle this before she gets any ideas." My dad replied, "Relax. She will do what we tell her. She always does." There was a pause, and then Sophie said, "What if she does not?" And my dad just laughed. A quiet, confident laugh. "She will." I remember standing there in the hallway, my backpack still on my shoulder, feeling this strange knot in my stomach. It was not fear exactly. It was more like something was off, and I could not ignore it anymore. That was the moment I started paying attention. And once I did, I began noticing things I wish I had seen years earlier. After that moment in the hallway, I started noticing patterns I could not unsee, and everything began to shift faster than I expected. About 2 weeks later, my grandparents asked me to come over alone. That alone was unusual, because my parents usually insisted on being involved in anything that had to do with them. When I got there, my grandma had already set the table, but she did not sit down right away. She just looked at me for a second like she was trying to decide something. Then my grandpa walked in with a folder. It was thick, organized, the kind of folder that feels important the second you see it. He sat across from me and said, "Emily, you are turning 18 soon, so there are some things we need to explain to you." My stomach dropped a little, but I nodded. They went through everything slowly. The properties, the accounts, the investments. It was more than I had ever imagined. I remember asking, "Why are you telling me all of this?" And my grandma reached across the table, held my hand and said, "Because this is yours." I did not even respond right away. I just sat there trying to process it. My grandpa added, "We have already set everything up legally. No one can touch it without your approval." That sentence stuck with me more than anything else. No one can touch it. On the drive home, my hands were still shaking. Not from fear this time, but from the weight of it. It was not just money. It was responsibility, freedom, a future that I could actually control. But the second I walked through the front door, that feeling changed. My mom was sitting in the living room, waiting. She did not ask how my day was. She just asked, "So, what did they tell you?" I hesitated for a second, then said, "Just general stuff." She narrowed her eyes slightly, like she knew I was holding back. My dad came in a few seconds later and leaned against the wall. "Emily," he said, calm but firm. "We need to be clear about something. Whatever your grandparents are planning, it needs to be handled properly. You are not equipped to manage that kind of responsibility on your own." I remember nodding slowly, but inside, something felt different. For the first time, I did not immediately agree with him. That night at dinner, Sophie would not stop talking about future plans. She said things like, "If we get the lake house, I want to redecorate it, and we should sell the downtown property, it is too much work." She kept saying, "we," not you, not Emily. Just we. I finally said, "It is not decided yet." The table went quiet. My mom put her fork down and said, "What do you mean?" I shrugged and said, "Nothing is finalized." My dad looked at me for a long second, then said, "Do not complicate things." That was it. That one sentence. Do not complicate things. It sounded simple, but it felt like a warning. Over the next few days, the pressure got more direct. My mom started bringing up documents, casually mentioning things like, "when you sign everything over," or "once we consolidate the assets." My dad began leaving papers on the kitchen counter, not saying anything, just letting them sit there where I would see them. Sophie started making comments like, "You are not really going to keep all of that to yourself, right?" It was subtle, but it was constant. And for the first time in my life, I did not give in right away. I smiled. I nodded. I played along. But in my head, I kept hearing my grandpa's voice. "No one can touch it." That was when I made a decision. I did not tell anyone. Not my parents, not Sophie, not even my closest friends. I just quietly started asking questions, making calls, learning things I had never needed to think about before. It felt strange, almost like I was preparing for something I could not fully see yet. And the closer my birthday got, the more obvious it became that my family was waiting for that same day, but for very different reasons. And I had a feeling that when that day came, something was going to happen that none of us could take back. The closer my birthday got, the more everything around me started to feel staged, like I was walking through something that had already been planned without me. About 5 days before I turned 18, my mom came into my room holding a folder. She smiled, sat on the edge of my bed, and said, "Sweetheart, we just want to make things easier for you." That sentence alone made my chest tighten. She opened the folder and showed me a few pages. Legal looking. Clean. Official. "These are just preliminary documents," she said. "Nothing complicated. It just lets us help manage everything until you are older." I did not touch them. I just looked at her and asked, "Why do you need this sign now?" She laughed softly, like I had said something naive. "Because it is the responsible thing to do, Emily. Your father and I know how to handle these things. You do not need to stress about it." That word again. Responsible. It always meant the same thing. Do what we say. That night, my dad brought it up again at dinner. He did not ask this time. He said, "We will go over the documents after your birthday dinner. It is time to get everything organized." Sophie chimed in immediately. "Yeah. It is not like you are going to manage all that by yourself." She said it like it was obvious, like it was already decided. I nodded slowly, kept my voice calm, and said, "I will think about it." My dad's expression changed just slightly. Not angry. Not yet. But there was something there. Something colder. Over the next few days, the pressure did not stop. It just got more polished. My mom started telling relatives that I was overwhelmed and that they were stepping in to help me. I overheard her on the phone saying, "She does not really understand what she is dealing with, but we are handling it." My dad began acting like the decisions were already made. He talked about our properties and our investments in conversations with other people, right in front of me. And the worst part? People believed him. Friends, extended family, even neighbors. They all started treating it like it was already settled. Like I had already handed everything over. Sophie leaned into it the most. She started making plans out loud. We should renovate the lake house this summer. We are definitely selling the downtown building. It is outdated. Every time she said we, it felt like something inside me twisted tighter. I tried to push back once, just once. I said, "It is not yours." The room went quiet. My mom looked at me like I had embarrassed her. My dad set his fork down slowly and said, "Do not start that." Just like that. Do not start that. Like I was the problem. Like I was creating conflict by simply saying the truth. The night before my birthday, everything felt too calm. My mom decorated the house. My dad ordered food from my favorite restaurant. Sophie even hugged me and said, "Tomorrow is going to be a big day for all of us." That sentence stayed with me. For all of us. Not for me. I barely slept that night. Not because I was scared, but because I knew something was coming. I just did not know exactly how far they were willing to go. The next evening, during the dinner, my dad gave another speech, talking about family, responsibility, trust. Everyone clapped, smiled. It looked perfect from the outside. And then, after the cake, he stood up and said, "All right, Emily, let us take care of the paperwork." My stomach dropped. He pulled out the same folder my mom had shown me days before, only this time it was thicker. Finalized. Ready. He placed it in front of me and slid a pen across the table. "Sign it," he said, not asking, not explaining, just expecting. I looked down at the papers, then back up at all of them. My mom watching closely, my dad waiting, Sophie smiling like she already knew the outcome. And in that moment, I realized they were not just asking me to trust them, they were counting on me not to fight back at all. And that was the exact moment everything I thought I knew about my family completely collapsed. For a second, I just stared at the pen in front of me, and I could feel every pair of eyes at that table locked on me, waiting for me to do what I had always done, and give in. My dad tapped the table lightly and said, "Emily, do not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." My mom leaned closer and lowered her voice, like she was trying to sound gentle. "This is for your own good." Sophie did not even pretend anymore. She just smiled and said, "Come on, just sign it already." I picked up the pen. Not because I agreed, but because I needed them to believe I did. I flipped through the pages slowly, pretending to read, nodding here and there like I was processing it all. Then I signed. My name. Clean and steady. My dad immediately relaxed. Like everything had just fallen into place. My mom smiled, relieved. Sophie actually laughed under her breath and said, "Finally." They did not ask questions. They did not double-check anything. They just assumed. They had won. The rest of the night felt like a performance. My dad poured drinks. My mom talked about next steps. And Sophie was already scrolling through her phone, probably looking at furniture or vacation ideas. I barely said anything. I just sat there, watching them celebrate something they did not fully understand. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet again. But this time, it felt different. I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls from my mom, even though she was just down the hall. That was strange. I stepped out of my room and noticed something immediately. The hallway closet was open. Files were gone. My dad's office door was wide open, drawers pulled out. I walked into the kitchen and saw my mom standing there, already dressed, holding her phone like she had been waiting. She looked at me and said, "Good, you are up." My dad walked in right behind her and added, "We finalized everything this morning." My heart dropped. "What do you mean finalized?" I asked. He did not hesitate. "We moved forward with the sale. It is done." I just stared at him. "Sale of what?" My mom answered this time, like it was obvious. "The properties, Emily. We already had buyers lined up. We just needed your signature." I felt like the room tilted for a second. You sold it? Already? Sophie walked in, grabbed a glass from the cabinet, and said casually, Yeah, it is not like we were going to wait around forever. I pulled out my phone immediately and stepped outside. I called the first number I could think of. My grandparents' lawyer. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text. No response. I checked my email. Nothing new. I went back inside and said, I need to talk to the lawyer. My dad shook his head. Calm. Controlled. There is no need for that. Everything has already been handled. I went to my room, closed the door, and started calling again. Over and over. Then I opened my messages and saw something new. An email timestamped less than an hour ago. It was from an unknown address. The subject line just said, Confirmation of transfer. My hands started shaking as I opened it. It listed details. Properties, accounts, signatures. My signature. Attached were scanned documents. The same ones I signed the night before, but different. Pages I had not seen. Clauses I had not read. My name was there, on everything. I felt this wave of panic hit me. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and heavy. I tried calling again. No answer. I texted. Nothing. I even wrote an email. Long, detailed, asking for clarification. No reply. Down the hall, I could hear my family talking like everything was normal. Laughing. Planning. Moving forward. And I was sitting there on my bed, phone in my hand, realizing that no matter how many calls I made, no matter how many messages I sent, no one was coming to fix this for me. I had never felt that alone in my own house before. I do not remember how long I sat there on my bed staring at that email, but I remember the feeling, like everything inside me just went quiet. Not panic, not anger, just this heavy, empty silence. I kept rereading the attachment, line by line, hoping I misunderstood something. But every page had my name on it. Every page had a signature that looked exactly like mine, and every page gave them control. I walked back into the kitchen slowly, holding my phone, and said, This is not what I signed. My dad did not even look surprised. He just leaned back in his chair and said, You signed the documents we gave you. My mom added, You should have read them more carefully. That was it. No apology. No hesitation. Just blame. I stood there for a second, waiting for someone to say this was a misunderstanding. Waiting for someone to fix it. But Sophie just shrugged and said, That is kind of on you. I nodded slowly, like I understood, even though I did not. Or maybe I did. I went back to my room and closed the door. I tried calling the lawyer again. Still nothing. I left a voicemail this time, my voice shaking a little, as I explained what happened, asking him to call me back as soon as possible. Then I sent another email. Then another. I even looked up other attorneys and called 2 different offices, trying to explain the situation to strangers who kept telling me they would need time to review everything. Time. That word felt useless in that moment. Downstairs, I could hear my parents talking on speakerphone with someone, probably the buyers. My dad's voice sounded confident, almost cheerful. Yes. Everything is signed and finalized, he said. We will move forward as planned. As planned. That phrase echoed in my head. This was not something they decided overnight. This was something they had been planning for a long time, and I had walked right into it. The rest of the day passed in this strange blur. No one checked on me. No one knocked on my door. At one point, my mom texted me from downstairs. We are ordering dinner, do you want anything? Like nothing had happened. Like I was just being dramatic for staying in my room. I did not reply. I just sat there, phone in my hand, watching the screen, waiting for it to light up with a callback that never came. As the sun went down, the house got quieter, doors closed, lights turned off. I could hear Sophie laughing in her room at something on her phone. completely unaffected. I realized then that whatever I was feeling, they were not feeling any of it. To them, this was already over. They had what they wanted. I was just part of the process. That night, I did not cry. I thought I would, but I did not. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The dinner, the papers, the way my dad slid the pen toward me like it was nothing, the way I signed without asking more questions. I kept thinking about my grandparents, about what they said. No one can touch it. I turned onto my side and closed my eyes. But I could not sleep. Not really. It felt like something inside me had shifted. Something quiet but permanent. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it immediately. It was not the lawyer. It was an automated reply. My email had been received. That was all. I stared at the message for a long time, then slowly set my phone down on the nightstand. And that was when it hit me. Not all at once, but clearly enough that I could not ignore it anymore. If no one was coming to fix this, then I was going to have to figure it out myself. And for the first time since that morning, the silence in my chest did not feel empty anymore. It felt like something starting to form. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual, not because I had somewhere to be, but because I could not stand lying there anymore. The house was quiet, like nothing had changed. Like the day before had not happened at all. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not look for my parents. I just got dressed, grabbed my bag, and left. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I spent the first few hours at a small coffee shop about 15 minutes away, the kind of place my family would never go to. I sat in the corner with my laptop open, rereading every document I had. Every email, every message. I made a list. Names, dates, questions. I did not wait for someone to call me back anymore. I started calling again, but this time, with purpose. Different law offices, different advisors. I did not explain everything at once. I just asked the right questions, one at a time. By the end of the day, I had 3 appointments set for the following week. That was the first thing I did on my own that actually felt solid. When I got back home that evening, no one asked where I had been. My mom was watching television. My dad was on his laptop. Sophie glanced at me for a second and then went back to her phone. It was like I was already fading out of their version of the story. And strangely, that made it easier. Over the next few days, I stopped trying to be part of the house. I kept to myself. I ate when they were not around. I left early. I came back late. I spent hours at libraries, coffee shops, anywhere that was not that kitchen table. I started organizing everything I knew, not emotionally, but practically. I opened my own bank account, not connected to anything they had access to. I gathered every piece of identification, every document that had my name on it. I made copies. I scanned them. I saved them in places only I could reach. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, methodical, one step at a time. The first meeting with a lawyer was the hardest. Not because of what he said, but because of how calm he was when I explained everything. He listened, nodded, and then said, "We will need to review all of this carefully." That word again. Carefully. But this time, it did not feel dismissive. It felt real. Like someone was finally taking it seriously. I left that office with a checklist. Not hope. Not yet. Just steps. That was enough. At home, things kept moving without me. My dad started talking more openly about closing timelines. My mom mentioned meeting with financial planners. Sophie started making comments like, "I cannot wait until this is all settled." I stopped reacting. I stopped correcting them. I just listened, watched, took notes in my head. Because now, every word mattered. Every detail mattered. And for the first time, I was not trying to argue with them. I was trying to understand exactly what they thought they had done. A week passed. Then another. The calls started coming back. Not all at once, but slowly. Emails with subject lines like document review and follow-up questions. One of the lawyers asked me to come back in person. When I sat down across from him again, he placed a stack of printed documents in front of me. The same ones I had seen before. But this time, they were marked, highlighted, flagged. He tapped one section and said, "Did you see this when you signed?" I shook my head. He nodded slightly, then turned a few pages and pointed at another section. "And this?" I shook my head again. He leaned back, folded his hands, and for the first time, there was a hint of something in his voice. Not concern. Not surprise. Something closer to interest. "Emily," he said, "there are some things here that do not quite add up." I did not say anything right away. I just looked down at the pages, then back up at him. And for the first time since everything started, I felt it. Not relief. Not yet. But something close to it. Because if things did not add up, then maybe this was not over the way they thought it was. The next few weeks were not loud or dramatic. But everything started to shift in ways that mattered more than anything I had felt before. I stopped thinking like someone who had lost everything, and started thinking like someone who needed to understand exactly what was still mine. The lawyer I met with asked me to come back again, this time with identification and any official paperwork tied to my name. I brought everything: birth certificate, social security card, old documents from my grandparents, even small things I had not thought about before. He reviewed them carefully, flipping through each page with a level of attention I had never seen in my own house. At one point, he paused, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Emily, I need you to answer something honestly. Before your birthday dinner, did you sign anything else? Anything at all?" I hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Yes," I said. "Earlier that day." He looked up immediately. "What kind of document?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy I had printed. "A trust agreement. Clean. Simple. Signed hours before that dinner ever started." He took it from me, read through it once, then again, slower. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled quietly. Not frustration, not concern. Something else. Something measured. "This changes things," he said. That was the first time I saw it clearly. Not hope. Not relief. Control. Over the next few days, everything became more structured. Meetings turned into plans. Plans turned into actions. I was not just reacting anymore. I was preparing. The lawyer helped me understand exactly what that trust meant. Every asset my grandparents left me had been moved into it legally before I signed anything at that dinner. That meant the documents my parents used were based on something that no longer belonged to me personally. They had acted on an assumption, and that assumption was wrong. I remember sitting there, listening to him explain it, and feeling something settle inside me. For the first time, I was not behind. I was ahead. I started carrying a folder with me everywhere I went. It had my name printed clearly on the tab. Emily Carter. Inside were copies of everything that mattered. The trust, the timelines, the notes from every meeting. It became grounding, something physical I could hold on to that reminded me I was not as powerless as they thought. Even the way I walked started to change. Not in a dramatic way. Just steadier, more certain. I stopped avoiding eye contact. I stopped shrinking when I entered a room. Because now, I knew something they did not. At home, nothing changed on the surface. My dad still talked about closing deals. My mom still acted like everything was under control. Sophie still made plans out loud, like she was already living in a future that had not been secured. But now when I listened, I was not confused. I was tracking every detail, every assumption they made, every timeline they mentioned, because it all mattered. One afternoon, my dad walked past me in the hallway and said, "You have been very quiet lately." I looked at him and said, I have just been busy. He nodded slowly, like he accepted that answer, but I could tell he was starting to notice the difference. I was not asking questions anymore. I was not pushing back. I was just observing. And that made him more uncomfortable than anything else I could have said. A few days later, I received another call from the lawyer. His tone was different this time. More direct. We are ready to move forward, he said. I sat there, phone in my hand, and just listened. He outlined the next steps, the documents, the timing. It was all precise, planned, controlled. When the call ended, I looked down at the folder in my lap. My name printed clearly on the front, and for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe fully. Because now, everything was lining up, and the version of the story my family believed was about to meet reality. By the time everything was ready, the house felt smaller than it ever had before, like the walls were closing in on a version of reality that was about to collapse. It was late afternoon when my dad called everyone into the living room. He sounded confident, almost proud, like he was about to announce something important. My mom came in first, wiping her hands on a towel, already smiling. Sophie followed right behind her, phone in hand, barely looking up. I stayed in the hallway for a second longer, holding the folder against my chest, feeling the weight of it settle into my hands. Then I walked in. My dad was standing near the coffee table, a stack of papers laid out neatly in front of him. He looked at me and said, "Good, you are here. This will not take long." I did not respond. I just sat down across from him, placing my folder on my lap without opening it. He took that as agreement. Of course he did. He cleared his throat and began explaining things in that same calm, controlled tone he always used when he wanted something to sound official. "We have finalized the sale agreements," he said. "The buyers are ready to move forward, and all we need now is to confirm the transfer timeline." My mom nodded along, adding, "This is a big step for our family, Emily. You should be proud." Sophie laughed lightly and said, "Yeah, this is actually happening." I watched them, one by one, letting each word settle. They were not nervous. They were not unsure. They believed every part of this was already done. My dad slid a document toward me, tapping the page with his finger. "We just need you to acknowledge this section," he said. "It confirms everything we discussed." I looked down at the paper but did not touch it. Instead, I asked, "Who else has seen these?" He paused for a second, not expecting that question. "The buyer's legal team," he said. "And our advisor." I nodded slowly. "And they all believe this is valid?" My mom stepped in quickly. "Of course it is. Everything has been handled properly." I looked back up at her, holding her gaze just long enough for her smile to shift slightly. My dad leaned forward, his voice tightening just a bit. "Emily, do not start questioning things now. We have already moved forward." Sophie rolled her eyes and said, "Can you just sign it so we can finish this?" The room felt quiet after that. Not peaceful, just heavy. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the small, normal sounds that made everything else feel sharper. I placed my hand on the folder in my lap but did not open it yet. My dad noticed. He straightened slightly, watching me more carefully now. "What is that?" he asked. I met his eyes and said, "Just something I brought." My mom laughed softly, trying to keep things light. "Emily, this is not the time to complicate things." There it was again. Do not complicate things. I nodded once, slowly, and rested my hand flat on the folder. For a moment, no one said anything, and in that silence, I could feel it clearly. They were still in control of their version of the story. They still believed I was exactly who I had always been. The one who would give in. The one who would sign. The one who would not push back. My dad tapped the table again, a little sharper this time. "Emily," he said, "we are waiting." I took a breath, steady and quiet, and finally moved my hand to open the folder. And that was the exact moment before everything they believed was about to fall apart. I opened the folder slowly, not rushing, not looking at them yet, just letting the sound of the paper sliding against itself fill the room for a second longer than it needed to. Then I pulled out the first document and placed it gently on the table between us. My dad frowned slightly, leaning forward to get a better look. My mom's smile stayed in place, but it felt thinner now, more forced. Sophie stopped scrolling on her phone and glanced up, curious. I did not say anything right away. I just tapped the top page once with my finger and then leaned back in my chair. "Before I sign anything else," I said, my voice steady, "I think you should read that." My dad picked it up, his expression already shifting from confident to mildly annoyed. "Emily, we do not have time for—" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes moved across the page once, then again, slower this time. My mom leaned in closer, trying to read over his shoulder. "What is that?" she asked quietly. He did not answer her right away. His jaw tightened, just slightly, and I could see the exact moment the first piece of it landed. He turned the page. Then another. Sophie stood up from her seat and walked over, peering at the document. "What is going on?" she asked, her tone no longer casual. I finally spoke again, still calm, still controlled. "It is a trust agreement," I said. My mom blinked, confused. "A what?" I met her eyes. "A trust. It was created in my name the day before my birthday dinner." The room went completely still. My dad lowered the papers just enough to look at me directly. "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice quieter now but sharper. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. "Everything my grandparents left me," I continued, "was transferred into that trust before I signed anything you gave me." My mom shook her head immediately, like she was rejecting the idea before fully understanding it. "That does not make any sense," she said. "You signed the documents." I nodded. "I did. But those documents were based on assets that were no longer legally in my name." Sophie let out a short laugh, but it sounded uncertain. "That is not how that works," she said. I looked at her and said, "Actually, it is." My dad stood up slowly, the papers still in his hand. "No," he said, more to himself than to me. "No, that is not possible." I watched him carefully, noticing how his confidence was slipping, not all at once, but piece by piece. "It is," I said. "And the trust is managed by a third party, which means none of the assets you listed were yours to sell." My mom stepped back slightly, her expression shifting into something I had never seen before. Not anger, not control, something closer to panic. "Emily," she said, her voice softer now, "why would you do that?" I held her gaze, because I needed to make sure no one could touch it. My dad exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "This changes everything," he muttered. I shook my head once. "No," I said quietly. "It does not change anything. It just means you did not understand what you were doing." Sophie looked between all of us, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Wait," she said. "What does that mean for the sale?" There was a pause. A long one. I let it sit there for a second before answering. "It means," I said, my voice still even, "you sold something you did not legally own." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. My dad looked down at the papers again, then back at me, like he was trying to find a version of this that made sense. But there was not one. And in that moment, I could see it clearly. The realization settling in. Not loud. Not explosive. Just quiet and devastating. Because for the first time since this started, they understood exactly what they had done. No one spoke for a long time after that. My dad was still standing, holding the papers like they might change if he looked at them differently. My mom slowly sat down, her hands resting in her lap, but I could see them shaking just slightly. Sophie stayed where she was, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when there is nothing left to argue against. My dad finally broke it. "There has to be a way to fix this," he said, more to himself than to me. He started pacing, running through possibilities out loud. "We can renegotiate. We can adjust the contracts. We just need to explain the situation." I watched him carefully, noticing how quickly his tone shifted from certainty to damage control. My mom looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time. "Emily," she said softly, "you should have told us." I let that sit for a second before answering. "You should have asked," I said. She flinched slightly, like that was not the response she expected. Sophie crossed her arms, defensive now. "So what, you just planned all of this?" she said. I shook my head. "No," I replied calmly. "I prepared for something like this." My dad stopped pacing and turned to me again. "You are part of this family," he said, his voice firmer now, trying to regain control. "We make decisions together." I met his eyes without hesitation. "No," I said quietly. "You made decisions for me." That landed harder than anything else I had said. He did not respond right away. He just stood there, the weight of it settling in. My mom tried again, her voice softer, almost pleading now. "We were trying to help you," she said. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. "You were trying to control something that was never yours," I answered. Sophie let out a frustrated breath and turned away, pacing a few steps before stopping. "So what happens now?" she asked. I looked at her, then back at both of my parents. "Now," I said, "you deal with the consequences of what you signed." My dad's expression hardened again, but it was different this time. Not confident, not controlled, just tense. "And you are just going to stand there and let this happen?" he asked. I paused for a second before answering. "I am not letting anything happen," I said. "I am just not fixing it for you." The room went quiet again. This time it felt final. My mom looked down at her hands. My dad stared at the papers, and Sophie leaned against the wall, her earlier certainty completely gone. No one asked me to sign anything else. No one tried to push the papers back toward me. For the first time, they were not leading the situation. They were reacting to it. I picked up my folder from the table and stood up slowly. No one stopped me. No one told me to stay. I walked toward the hallway, then paused for just a second before turning back. Not because I had more to say, but because I needed to be clear. "Do not involve me in anything related to those contracts," I said. "I will not speak to the buyers. I will not make calls. This is yours now." My dad opened his mouth like he was about to respond, but nothing came out. My mom just nodded faintly, like she understood, even if she did not want to. I turned and walked away after that. Back to my room. Back to the one space in that house that still felt like it belonged to me. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a second, letting the silence settle in again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty. Not heavy. Just unresolved. Because even though the truth was out, nothing about what came next was going to be simple. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that day, but it became something it had never been before. Clear. The house felt different in the weeks that followed. Quieter in a way that was no longer tense, just distant. My parents stopped trying to involve me in anything related to the situation, not because they chose to, but because they had no place to put me in the version of the story they had created. The legal process moved forward without me stepping in, just like I said it would. The buyers pulled back. The contracts were challenged. And everything my parents had assumed was secured slowly unraveled in front of them. I did not celebrate it. I did not watch closely either. I focused on something else, myself. I moved out a few months later into a small apartment about 20 minutes away. Nothing extravagant, just a clean space with a window that let in morning light. It was the first place I had ever lived where every decision, every object, every quiet moment was mine. I kept the folder at first, the one with my name printed on it. But over time, I needed it less. Not because it was not important, but because I had already become what it represented. Someone who understood her own boundaries. Someone who did not need permission to protect what mattered. I visited my grandparents' old lake house once, alone, standing on the wooden deck as the water stayed perfectly still in front of me. I remember holding that old music box they gave me years ago, the one I thought I had lost, but had quietly taken back before I left. I opened it, listened to the soft melody, and for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood something I had ignored for years. Sometimes the people you are taught to trust the most are the ones you need to step away from in order to find yourself. And that does not make you ungrateful. It makes you aware. If you are listening to this right now and something in your life feels off, even if you cannot explain it yet, trust that feeling. It does not have to be loud to be real. Protect your name. Protect your choices. Protect your peace. You do not owe anyone access to your life just because they expect it. And if you have ever felt alone in that kind of moment, you are not. I know what that silence feels like. And I also know what it feels like to walk out of it. Thank you for staying with me through this story, truly. It means more than you think. My name is Emily Carter. I am 28 years old. And the one thing I want you to take from this is simple. You are allowed to choose yourself, even when it is hard. And if this story stayed with you, there are more moments like this. More stories that go deeper into what people do and how we learn to stand back up. You might find something in those that you need to hear right now. Take your time, stay with the feeling, and I will see you in the next story.